overcome. You know, that song is encouraging because we know deep down in our hearts, we do believe that we shall overcome. Otherwise, we would not be doing the work that we do. We would not show up every day. We would not walk with the limp. We would not continue to walk in pain. We would not continue to fight against the injustices and the schisms that we are faced with every day. And I just want you to know that I know, and you can say to somebody else, that deep down in my heart, I know we shall overcome, but also staring them in the eyes and say, and you know what? I am not afraid. I am not afraid to overcome. I am not afraid to be an overcomer. Greetings and thank you for attending the sixth Lunch and Learn in our Petrochemical Lunch and Learn series. Today, we will talk about when disaster strikes and protecting vulnerable communities. My name is Bishop Marcia Dinkins, the founder and executive director of the Black Appalachian Coalition, or you can just simply say Black. Black is partnered with the Ohio River Valley and Main Street to offer this series with the intention to build our healthcare as a human right policy platform that will seek accountability for the health harms experienced by the petrochemical industry. You may or may not know that nearly 40 million Americans live within 1 mile of a petrochemical facility, and untold millions are potentially exposed to pipeline and tanker accidents. The need for planning and preparation is not high on the awareness of those responsible for our public safety until disaster strikes, as we know, then they show up. Today's Lunch and Learn will focus on how we can prepare and safeguard our communities with special attention given to the most vulnerable populations, the elderly, the ill or disabled, and children. We will also talk about how trauma is associated with disasters, but how we can see the opportunity inside of our crisis. Today, we will hear from Dr. Patricia DeMarco from Main Street, who is also a former council member, author of several books, and longtime community activist, and she's an educator. You will also hear from Bonnie Dunn from West Virginia State University Metro Area Agency on Aging, who will speak to emergency and evacuation planning and how to plan for the elderly and infirm in cases of disaster. We also have with us Jason Hallmark, who is a regional organizer who focuses on petrochemicals and pollution at Climate Reality PA. Jason will address the needs of people with disabilities in emergency planning. You will also hear from two individuals who will share their lived experiences. The first is Chris Albright from East Palestine, who will speak to chemical contamination and the lessons learned from this disaster. You will also hear from Gwen Jones, who will speak to the impact of hurricanes and floods and lessons learned. Lastly, you will hear from myself as I briefly speak to recognizing the trauma from disasters beyond our control and how we can begin to move beyond disaster and to determination. I say again that we are so glad that you could join us today. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Patty DeMarco. Welcome, Patty.
Thank you so much, Marcia, and thank you to everyone who for coming, for my colleagues and friends, and for Ben, who's going to put my slides up. And I am really delighted to have a chance that we can talk about what we do. We've been talking about the origins of petrochemicals and how they affect us in various ways, but we're going to focus today on what you do when disaster strikes. Next slide, please. And the main kinds of facilities that are prone to disasters cause toxic emission incidents, pipeline explosions and spills, tanker spills and explosions from trucks and rail cars, and also contamination that results from storms and floods as it affects these facilities all around the country. Next slide, please. So what you find is that this is not an isolated kind of an option. There are close to 12,000 facilities across the nation that have extremely hazardous chemicals in amounts that could be harmful if accidentally released. And there have been numerous incidents. Just in 2 years, we had 829 hazardous chemical incidents. That's more than one a day. And there have been deaths and 150 incidents that caused injury, hospitalization, or acute health contaminations, and over 200 communities were required to evacuate within just a 2-year period. So there's been a lot of documentation. And pipelines are even more, if you've never seen the pipeline map of the US, some of them are so dense that you can't even see space between the pipelines in areas where we are in the Northeast, in Appalachia, down in the coastal areas of Texas and Louisiana. And in the country all around, you have delivery lines from pipelines under the ground. And they've had 11,208 separate incidents between 1996 and 2015, 360 fatalities, thousands of injuries, and over $6.9 billion in damages. And the causes of this are really alarming. 45% of our pipelines are more than 50 years old. And so they have poor material condition from corrosion and bad seals, and they're subject to heavy rain and lightning damage, and also human error when they have valves left open or people puncturing while digging. So you have a ubiquitous problem. This is not a hazard that is isolated to a couple of cities that you hear about. This is something that has a broad impact all across the country. Next slide, please. And the traveling by rail is also a really significant issue. There are an average of 2.2 million carloads of chemicals, 181 million tons per year traveling over the railroads. And over 3 million people and 670,000 children attend school within a mile of potential pipeline railroad crossings. And people of color make up the largest group at risk from these kinds of disasters. There have been 1,500 train accidents, including derailments and tracker equipment damage in 1 year since East Palestine disaster, just in 1 year. Next slide, please. So climate change is really the basic cause for a lot of these accidents and damages. Extreme precipitation events and more frequent and more severe hurricanes, as well as sea level rise, has caused a lot of places that never really thought about the potential for contamination to actually be a huge issue. 7.3 million single and multifamily homes in the Gulf and Atlantic coasts alone are at risk of storm surge, flood damage, and contamination because of petrochemical facilities along the coasts. And the estimated cost for reconstructing this is over $1.8 trillion. So we are facing something that is really a nationwide problem. And next slide, please. The fact that it has persisted really makes us need to look at how we protect our vulnerable populations. This is not something you can leave to deal with, when it's upon you. You have to think in advance. This is not something that just happens somewhere else. We are all, almost everywhere in this country, going to need to have a plan. And we look at the health harms that can come from the contamination from petrochemicals, but we need to have some basic emergency planning awareness, and we need to know what we are likely to encounter where we are. Next slide, please. So when you have petrochemical facilities hit by hurricanes, 2005, 2017 were major ones, but almost every year. And the petrochemical facilities remain ill-prepared for hurricane disasters. They don't have containment and isolation areas. You can see the sheen on the water of petrochemical facilities that have leaked because of flooding. A lot of processes are contained by electricity that keeps them running properly. When the power goes out, those protective pumping and storage facilities are often vulnerable and end up leaking or exploding. We've had over 200 onshore releases of hazardous chemicals of petroleum or natural gas just from Hurricane Katrina. And areas impacted by storm surge, 10% of the facilities within a risk management plan area or on the toxic release inventory maintained by the EPA, 28% of those are experiencing accidental releases. So this is something where we really need to look at strengthening the laws, that require emergency preparedness to be more robust, more strictly enforced, and more universally applied. Next slide, please. So when you look at assessing the climate vulnerabilities, you need to look at things ranging all the way from power outages that can happen during storms, but also what can happen with water shortages and contamination, because your normal water supply may not return to safety even when the flood conditions recede. And we have to look at what happens when you have a need for evacuation. The preparedness arrangements are often insufficient to really support a family for the duration of the time that may be needed to restore or repair the damage. So Bonnie Dunn is going to talk to us about making a plan, especially for elderly people. And we need to protect the ill or disabled people who may not be mobile instantly. We have to provide for children. What kind of preparations are going on in your schools? And do you know what they are? And do your children know what they are? I know when I was little, we used to have drills for nuclear explosions or attacks. And what you do, get under your desk, and we had water under the basement. None of that would have actually helped, but we had an awareness campaign where everybody worried about it. Next slide, please. So I've put together a number of resources that will be available to you, but knowing what kind of disasters are likely in your area is really important. Find out, is there a petrochemical facility near you or an industrial facility that may need to have special attention in case of a disaster? And ask your local fire, police, and municipal government first responders what their plan is. Do you have public meetings that talk about it? And how do you receive communication in an emergency? If the power goes out, your TV or your radio may not work. How do you get information about what's going on? And what do your government officials, your local government officials are on the front line? What do they know about these issues? And can we help them make sure that they're prepared? And each family should also have a communication plan and an emergency assembly location so that if you get separated or you're in different places, you know that there's a safe place where you can all keep track of each other. And have an emergency response kit regardless of where you are, because even power outages can be life-threatening if they persist or if you don't know what to do. And your important papers can be really critical in cases of an emergency. Having a way to have copies, especially of your critical papers, is really important. And you put them in a safe location in waterproof container or in a bank box or with a relative. Put them in the cloud so you can retrieve them. And you can plan for shelter in place for both homes, schools, or business locations. And the Red Cross has a lot of really good information about how to do that. And if you have to evacuate, there are a lot of resources about how to prepare for that. But Habitat for Humanity has a really good disaster response preparedness for homeowners and family. Next slide. So all of that will be available to you after this session. And there are a number of resources from the Centers for Disease Control and the OSHA and the Chemical Hazards and Toxic Substances Division of OSHA and from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And you can report events to the National Response Team as well. And you'll get a FEMA response center. But really, your local community is the front line. That is the most likely place that you're going to go to get and receive help. Your volunteer fire department, your police department, your local mayor, you need to have those people informed about what to do and let them know that you're concerned and that you expect to have an effective emergency plan. Find out what they do. Go to a council meeting and ask them, you know, what do you do if one of those trains that goes less than a mile from our borough building actually has the kind of explosion or disaster that we've seen in 1,500 events in 1 year all around the country? What if it happens in your town? Do your local officials know what to do? And make sure they know that you're concerned. Get in their face and ask them for an answer. So that's where I am on this issue. Next slide, please. We're going to hear from Jason and Bonnie in a minute. And then we'll hear from, as Marcia has already told you all this, so I don't need that one, but I do have something exciting to tell you before I end. Next slide. And that is our September petrochemical lunch and learn on the 19th. We'll have Dr. Jalone White Newsom, who is the Federal Environmental Justice Officer for the White House Council on Environmental Quality. She is amazing, and she will be able to talk to us about the EJ40 initiative and what a tremendous effect that has had on helping disinvested communities all across the country. So with that, I will turn this over to Marcia for our next speaker.
Yes, thank you for that information, Patty. I couldn't write fast enough.
That's okay, it's all written down.
I'm glad it's recorded. But our next speaker you're going to hear from is Bonnie Dunn. And Bonnie, I pass the mic over to you.
Thank you so much. And I guess Ben has control of my slides. Greetings from Charleston, West Virginia. I'm Bonnie Dunn. I'm an administrative assistant for Metro Area Agency on Aging. That's a mouthful, but we are Region 2 in West Virginia that covers 11 counties. I was invited to participate today because I'm currently implementing an emergency preparedness program in our 11 county region of Southern West Virginia at senior citizen sites. These are nutrition sites. The seniors come in and have lunch, and they like occasionally to have an educational program, something besides bingo. And today they were shooting pool and a number of other things, but they've been grateful for this program we've been implementing. It has it's grant funded by a project through the Administration for Community Living. Our target audience is senior citizens, the disabled, and veterans. Probably next slide, please. The partnership also includes senior nutrition centers, West Virginia State University Extension Service, which is a close neighbor of ours, and we are under their umbrella, and the EXCITE program, which is Extension Collaborative on Immunization, Teaching, and Engagement. The EXCITE program has been around for 3 years. The fourth session of it is the Bridge Initiative, and that is one where seniors who have limited health coverage or none whatsoever can go to a Walgreens or a CVS and get COVID vaccinations free of charge. The next slide, please. So 9 things that we're addressing in this program. First of all, we're looking at the aftermath of the pandemic. I'm giving the participants a little opportunity to express how they felt when it was all over. In today's session, because I just came from teaching a program, one lady said, "Oh, is it over? I think it's starting all over again." And I think she could be right, because COVID in our area has been on the upswing, and we just feel like, oh no, is it going to start again? We look at their fears and for their future outbreaks, not only of COVID, but other things, and trying to increase the awareness of COVID vaccine itself, and just like the Bridge program where they can get those free vaccinations. And then West Virginia ADRC is under our umbrella, and they are there representing the resources that they have to offer to senior citizens. Excuse me. We also are identifying ways to protect them from home fires. So many senior citizens die in a home fire, and so the Red Cross and local fire departments are helping with that, providing free smoke detectors and even going into the homes and installing them for them. We talked to them about tracking information from multiple sources. So many times when seniors particularly will call a doctor or call for help from an agency, they don't really take good notes as to what the person they're talking with is telling them. And then they may write it on an envelope or a piece of paper, and then it gets lost. So we've provided them with a little notebook and some examples on how to take notes during that phone conversation. Get the person's name, get a phone number, make sure you have that written down, what agency or what medical provider, and what they have suggested that you do. and to keep a running list of that so that you can make sure that you get your questions answered, you get your health care needs taken care of in a timely manner. There, if you'll, so let me finish this. The emergency supplies to have in your home. There are 2 lists. You'll get some examples of those in a moment. How to build a kit within the home of medical supplies. There's a checklist that they take home with them. Do you have all these items? If not, be sure and get them. Have a nice emergency medicine type box. And then the next thing is having a food supply. If you become ill, fever, upset stomach, diarrhea, getting the flu, whatever, you may not have soup and crackers and some of the kinds of foods in the house that you would need for those episodes. Ginger ale, 7-Up, whatever your choice is. And so we've given them checklists on that as well. And then the last is tracking their personal health history. And so mention was made earlier by Patricia about having those documents in a plastic bag. And you'll see what we give them in another slide, but it's a book that they can journal their health. And that way, if something comes up, they can grab that packet and have that information with them, and they won't have to rely on the internet or any other means. Okay, the next slide, please. So these are the resources, and in this packet for the health history, they get a personal health history journal. They get a wallet size medication chart that they keep their current medications listed in that, what they're for, what the dosage is, those kinds of things. There's an educational leaflet about vaccinations and health history, and then a vaccination card holder. The COVID vaccine card holder was a little on the large side, and so West Virginia State University in the Excite program had this vaccination card holder made up so that people could keep that in there, keep it clean, keep it safe, because you weren't supposed to laminate them. You were supposed to keep them somewhere else in case they had to be photocopied. Then we give them a quick guide to community services. In West Virginia, United Way started this program a number of years ago, and actually it comes in maybe 1 page or 2. It looks like a page out of the old telephone directories. And I know when I go out doing the program, we all laugh, a telephone directory, what's that? It seems like that's become an obsolete item. And so this is a quick reference, and it's county by county, it's county specific. So we make copies. Like today, we were in Putnam County, West Virginia, and their quick guide was specific to Putnam County and their resources, and gives the name of the company, the agency, social service agency, and the phone number where you can contact them. Then they get that list for food supply for sick day, medical supply. There's a couple of rack cards that give them information on how to access services. We have discovered so many senior citizens aren't accessing all the services that are available to them. And it's simply because they don't know about it. So we're trying to educate them as to what is available to make their lives easier. Part of that is that ADRC, the Aging and Disability Resource Center, that is housed under the Metro AAA umbrella here. And then Bridging Resources is a new initiative for caregiving within the family. If you need a caregiver, Bridging Resources is an initiative that can assist with that. Next slide, please. So there's, and I know you probably can't see much of this, but that's what that quick guide looks like. The next slide, please, is just page 2 of it. And also it utilizes and capitalizes on the West Virginia 211 number. And in West Virginia, you just dial 211. Of course, that's a national initiative and can get a lot of references to other social services or problems that you might have. And I put that to the test when my stepfather was aging, and he was falling into a donut hole of paying $800 a month copay for a medication. And I called 211, and all they asked for was the zip code where he lived. I told him the situation, and I was given 3 social service agencies that could possibly help him with that. So I know it works from a personal standpoint. Okay, next slide. Thank you. This is the sick day food supply. And the reason I wanted you to see this, not only for the checklist, and I don't know why there's an X in pudding mixes. Don't ask me. I tried to get it out and couldn't. You know how technology works. But the sick day kit, I found this interesting. In researching ways that I could possibly help folks, I found out that Amazon.com has sick day kits for food. And I said, well, what a novel idea. And they have, I think, 3 levels, $20. I think it goes to 30 some and then 50 some dollars. And of course, there's more in the kit as the price increases. But, you know, if you have someone maybe in another town, you can't get to them, or another state, and you want to send them a box of things. And if you look at that real close, it has beverage in it. It has Tylenol. It has some crackers. It has things that would be items that the person who is ill may want to have if they don't have it on hand, and if they don't have someone to go shopping for them. So I just thought that was a really neat idea to share with folks. The next slide, please. And now this is just, and again, I know you can't see this, but this is what they got. And it's much more detailed because I could only capture the first half of it, but it's supplies for a sick day. And again, it's a checklist. And I was watching the seniors this morning as I was teaching, looking at these lists. And I could, you know, you could just see them, and they had a pencil and they were going down the list. And it's like, oh, I guess I better get some of these things. So again, it's another resource to help them prepare for an emergency. The next slide, please. So why, what caused us, what prompted us to do this, besides the obvious? Well, in the last 30 years in West Virginia, we've had probably more than our share of catastrophic events. And a lot of them have been around flooding and snowstorms. And when it becomes catastrophic, my definition is the National Guard comes out. And I know about 30 years ago, I was living in more southern West Virginia, in Raleigh County, Beckley, West Virginia area. We had a tremendous snowstorm, and the National Guard had to come in. And I recall vividly of bodies that they were pulling out of the snow. And most of them were senior citizens, folks who had tried to get out of their home and go seek help, or go be with a neighbor, go find someplace that had heat, and you know, no preparation for any of that whatsoever. But 3 things have happened here in West Virginia. So June 29, 2012, if you were living here in West Virginia, we experienced a derecho, no electricity. And that was quite an event, because you're looking at summer months. I eventually picked up my cat, put him in the carrier, packed my bags, and I went to Tennessee to my daughter's. Not everybody had that luxury. I know folks that tried to get hotel rooms in areas within the state that the derecho had not impacted. It was mass bedlam, as I call it, because without power, we just don't realize how spoiled we are. And then on January the 9th in 2014, which clearly relates to the topic here, is the disaster of the MCHM spill in the Elk River in Charleston, West Virginia, which caused our water intake to be contaminated. And I never thought that I would find myself in my car sitting in line trying to get a case of bottled water. I wasn't prepared, and I should have known better. My stepfather always had 12 gallons of drinking water in the pantry. And I used to kind of make fun of him. Well, I don't do that anymore. But that water contamination went on for quite a while. It was pretty bad. The water had a horrible odor to it. At the time, I was working for West Virginia State University. Shortly thereafter, they asked me to write an article on how to survive with a bottle of water, of which I wrote the article. And fortunately for me, I had visited a lot in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, in the town of Cass, where water was a shortage. They had outside toilets, the Johnny houses, and I knew how to take a bath with a little tiny bit of water. Then in March the 11th, 2020, we know exactly what happened, and that was the great pandemic, which no one was prepared for. So all of these emergencies, and the title of our program is Emergency Preparedness, What If, and then ... The next slide, please. So what we do, participants who are veterans, we have a personal health history journal that addresses PTSD that we provide for them as well, and explain what they should do with that, what to do with that journal. Next slide, please. I took a picture. I got all these things together. I thought if you had a visual. So starting to the left is the Military Health and Wellness. And it's a tremendous document, and it has a history of PTSD, and it has places where they can journal some of their thoughts. It encourages them to seek help if they have not done so. And it goes in that purple confidential folder. Then that red and black bag is what has the personal health history journal. It has the little red logging book as they talk to doctors or social service agencies. That don't wait, vaccinate is what the medication or the COVID vaccination card goes in. The medication little chart in that little white envelope that goes into the wallet. And I have found that to be wonderful. I've got one in my purse that has all my medications. And then the RAC cards on the bridge program to the right, the blue, and then the ADRC, and then a leaflet on vaccinations and health literacy. So basically what we're doing, we're giving them an overview of preparedness, tools that they can go home and start thinking through the kinds of things they need to do, and looking at emergency preparedness across the board. So the next slide, please.
Bonnie, can we wrap up soon because we're running way over?
I'm finished.
Okay.
I'm finished. I know it's time. This we could talk about forever. So there's my contact information if you want to contact us, and we would be happy to share what we're doing with you. I thank you for the opportunity, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that information, Bonnie. And I know it's a lot to take in, but you will receive everything via after the lunch and learn. The next speaker we have is Jason Hallmark from Climate Reality PA.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm very excited to be here with you all. My name is Jason Hallmark. I work for the Climate Reality Project as a petrochemical and pollution organizer. Next slide, please. A little bit about me. I was diagnosed with MS in 2018. And at this time, I also decided to get more involved with the climate crisis and environmental justice as well. I volunteered for the Climate Rally chapter in Pittsburgh in 2018. And shortly after being diagnosed, I applied for and was accepted to an expedition to the Arctic to study climate change and sustainability, and to do sustainability training. That was in 2019. And next slide, please. And all of that to set up what really got me thinking about the intersection of disability and climate change. MS is definitely can have heat intolerance, or just either way, temperature up or down. People living MS can experience problems with both extremes. A lot of my symptoms are worsened with heat, even as much as a 1/4 degree rise in body temperature can have some pretty serious impacts, including fatigue, blurred vision, loss of balance, worsening of cognitive symptoms, like concentrating, memory. I get very numb as well. Walking definitely becomes a lot more difficult. And uh, and of course, with the changing climate and becoming warmer, this can be difficult. But what really made me think about this was in 2020 during a heat wave in Western Pennsylvania. I was going through a relapse. I have relapse remitting multiple sclerosis, and I spent almost 2 months out of work as well. And at the time, I was living in a home that only had air conditioning in the bedroom. And it got to the point where I was spending almost all of my time in the bedroom. The kitchen was too hot to cook, so at a time when I wasn't working, I was spending a lot of money, including credit, on just buying food for myself. And and this was shortly after I got back from the Arctic studying the way our climate is changing. I went to school for sustainability and climate, and I also, like I mentioned, joined and volunteered for my local climate reality chapter. So it made me think, if I have knowledge and resources of the changes that are happening, how can other people in my community prepare for what's to come, if I wasn't even able to with that knowledge? And so I decided to really dive into the impacts that the changing climate does have on people with disabilities, and the numbers were pretty striking. One thing I did notice, even when I bring this up, is there's always more of a push to make events more accessible, which I think is great, which is a very good first step. But something I also noticed, that the movement itself is not very accessible. Next slide, please. And like this, how can you have a seat at the table if you can't get in the door? This was energy minister who was left out of first day of discussions during COP, the Conference of the Parties, COP26 in Scotland, which is of course the big global gathering to discuss what we're going to do about climate change. And that really made me think, like, the events need to be accessible, but the movement itself needs to be accessible. Next slide, please. Disability rights are a climate justice issue. People living with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by disasters, and I've seen different numbers, but a lot say up to 4 to 5 times more likely to die during a disaster if you are disabled. And some of the reasons are, decision makers aren't fully, may not fully consider people with disabilities in planning. And emergency warnings and other important messages may not be designed with accessibility in mind. And of course, that's always one of the first barriers for people with disabilities in a disaster, is effective communication. And even thinking further out than that, there may be need for ongoing care that could be disrupted in times of disaster. And we see a lot, unfortunately, have a lot of experiences with this when it comes to things like different hurricanes. Hurricane Maria, one of the deadliest disasters in American history. A large portion of the people who passed didn't actually die from the actual storm, but from things like not having refrigeration, access to electricity for refrigeration for medications, or hospitals not having working ventilators, and other various life-saving or life-sustaining treatments needed. So that definitely something that really needs to be focused on initial planning as well as continuity care for people who need it. And people with disabilities are more likely to have social and economic risk factors such as poverty, unemployment that could put them even at greater risk than they already are. Next slide, please. Yes, and think about disability and disaster. Some federal census data that recently came out shows some of the disparity. For example, 70% of deaf people who were evacuated reported living in unsanitary conditions a month after the disaster. And if you compare that to only 7% of evacuees with good hearing were in unsanitary conditions, and then looking at people who are unable to walk, more than 74% reported experiencing a lack of food a month after disaster compared to only 9% of people who could walk. And one of the scarier statistics there also was the majority of disabled people who are forced to evacuate never make it home. And a lot of times that's because they're institutionalized, and it's a lot easier to get people into institutions than it is to really get them out. Next slide, please. So when really just looking at how you're going to prepare and what you want to do, the first step is just emergency planning, making sure government agencies and corporations develop emergency plans that consider the needs of disabled individuals, including accessible transportation, evacuation plans, and access to medical care. It's imperative that the disabled community has meaningful input when emergency plans are made. And I've even experienced this personally. Meaningful input isn't, I think it's great that there was a plan that I was offered to look at after it was already written to make sure that it was accessible to people, which is great. I really appreciated that, but my thoughts were if you included somebody from the beginning, that it would be, then you wouldn't have to ask somebody and you wouldn't have any of these issues. So just having the people be involved from the very beginning of planning is essential. And of course, communication, like I mentioned earlier, providing clear and accessible information about emergency procedures and updates are critical to ensure that disabled individuals can make informed decisions about their own safety. Shelter and housing. Disabled individuals may need specialized housing and shelter that meet their unique needs. The government should prioritize the development of accessible and inclusive shelter facilities. Even though a lot of facilities strive to be ADA compliant or have to be ADA compliant, for me, that's the very bare minimum that you could do, and it's not enough. But yes, going above and beyond ADA compliance for shelters is, I think, really also a good plan. And of course, support services. Additional support may be required during and after disaster, including personal care, medical care, mental health support. So all of these should be prioritized to all of them who need them. And that's not just for disabled people in the disabled community, but I believe that should be for everybody as well who would need these services. And community outreach is a huge part of this. Like we've heard earlier, the people, really the first responders are your community, is your community. And I say a lot of the times, especially for people with disabilities, the people first responders normally are their families, their neighbors, people who know them and know their situation. Next slide, please. Some of the things that I'm currently working on, and something we actually just launched, is the Disability and Disaster Archive. It's a video archive that aims to capture the lived experiences of people with disabilities during and after a major disaster. You know, like we talked about, disabled people must navigate a world that wasn't built for them, and these structural issues only become worse when a disaster strikes. So this project will amplify their voices and use the disability knowledge and wisdom to help influence policy that will protect not only the most vulnerable, but everybody else as well. The first installment focused on the East Palestine train derailment, and this QR code and the YouTube link that's right down there as well if you want to check it out. Next slide, please. Something else that we're currently working on and hoping to launch at the end of this month, working with the People Over Petro Coalition, and we're partnering with the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, which is the only U.S. disability-led organization with a focused mission of equity for people with disabilities and people with access and functional needs throughout all planning, programs, services, and procedures before, during, and after disasters and emergencies. So these emergency response frameworks are focused on petrochemical facilities, and this is a first of its kind disability-centered frameworks that focus on for these facilities. And right now we have a few different frameworks. The first one is just an overview of the industry and petrochemical disasters. Then we have individual preparedness for petrochemical disasters. And then another one is disability inclusion, access, and equity in petrochemical disasters, the guidance for industry. And then we also have guidance for local government. Next slide, please. And here's some resources. The first one is just a blog I wrote last year for Disability Pride Month that basically outlines and summarize what I talked about today. I put POPCO, the People Over Petro Coalition, on there, and soon a lot of the disability and disaster things that we're working on will be housed there. I put the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. It's a great organization. I definitely suggest you all check it out and follow them. And then the last one is the Disability and Climate Change, a public archive project. It's a very, very great project with a lot of great interviews with disabled first responders, disabled organizers, and a lot of great people, disabled organizers really working on this topic. Next slide. And I believe that it is it for me. And the last thing, something that I always try to instill in people and remind people is the fact that the disability community does have knowledge and wisdom. Like I said before, this is a group of individuals who spent a lot of their life adapting to a world that wasn't built for them. So when we're trying to adapt to a world that is currently changing, you're really missing out on a lot of knowledge and wisdom that not only will help protect them, but help protect everybody else. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for such an informative PowerPoint. I mean, you know, the educational information and the importance of even us looking at how we bring disability or include persons with disabilities in our own work, in our own work plans, in our own community meetings, organizations, etc. It is so important that we remember, you know, to incorporate disability justice. Our next speaker is from East Palestine, and he will share his lived experience from that incident in East Palestine. And so I'd like to welcome Chris Albright. And after Chris Albright, we'll have another person who will share her experience as well, and her name is Gwen Jones. So Chris, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. It's an honor being here, talking to everybody here. Obviously, like she said, I'm Chris Albright. I am from East Palestine, Ohio, where in February of 2023, we had a toxic train derailment which dumped millions of gallons of toxic chemicals on our town. I have some stats here. There were 52 total cars on that train. 17 of them were completely burned. 15 of them were impinged, which means they had fire around them, which could have, been burned and everything. Some of the things that were on that train, obviously one of the bigger ones that contaminated. So a tank car on there that had pizza dough flour. That's harmless, right? It is until it's ignited. Once it ignites, it becomes a completely different structure and is very toxic. There was a lot of them that were on there that seemed harmless, but are actually very, very toxic. I know we're short on time, but so I'll kind of go through this kind of quickly. But the night of the derailment, we had no idea what to do. No clue what to do. They came here and evacuated us at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And we didn't know where to go. We have pets, we have kids, we have all kinds of different things. And with that being said, since then I have definitely tried to have some things in place here for disaster preparedness. Plastic sheeting. If you're stuck and you can't get out, plastic sheeting and duct tape to put over your windows is something you should definitely have, because that'll try to keep everything inside in and all the bad stuff outside. A radio with a crank radio to keep informed on what's going on. Because if the power's out, you can't get onto the internet, you can't use your phones, you can't watch TV. Since the train derailment happened here, our lives have completely changed. Yes, we were unprepared. I mean, nobody prepares for a toxic train derailment. It's not something you really think is going to happen to you. Since the derailment, I have developed congestive heart failure, which turned into severe heart failure from breathing in those chemicals. My wife has high blood pressure. My one daughter's experienced nosebleeds. My youngest daughter, who was 8 years old, well, she was 7 when it happened, but at 8 years old, started menstruating. A lot of those chemicals that were in that train affect reproductive organs. Our government isn't doing anything to help us, so we need to help ourselves and help each other. I'm very proud to be a part of this today and talk about this, because when there's nowhere you can turn to us. You can turn to your people in your community. You can turn to your friends, your pastors, your priests, your neighbors. Everybody around you is going to, want to try to help out. And I've definitely learned that. I've been talking with people across the country about this. This whole thing, and one of the things that really gets me is this all could have been prevented. They didn't need to do anything that they did. The vent and burn, the controlled release was not necessary. The tankers were actually cooling down. They did that to keep the tracks moving, and it was all profit over people, and they sacrificed us. And I've also been learning too, since the derailment, how many different places around this country are now sacrifice zones. You look at Toledo, Ohio, with the algae blooms in the water, and Pikestown, Treasure Island, Hunters Point. There's all kinds of places across this country. Baltimore with the train derailment they had there. It's out of hand, and we really need to do something to hold these people accountable. And we have to unite. Not one person, not one group is going to be able to do it. It's going to take all of us together as unified front to handle this and make these people see what's going on and hold them accountable. So in the chat, I did leave my Facebook, my Twitter, X. I am also on Snapchat, Instagram, all the different platforms, my phone number and my email. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions, anything you have. I'll be more than glad to offer any advice or insight that I possibly can. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Chris, first of all, from me and others who are in this Zoom meeting today, we want to express our deepest love to you and your family. We are I know apologies doesn't change anything, but just know that you do have a community here that's willing to stand with you And I'm so sorry to hear what happened to your family. But this again necessitates why we must build a movement that speaks of solidarity and create a drumbeat because we're dying slowly. And I always say it's death by design. And so we just have to, you know what, we have to redesign things. So I want to thank you again for sharing with us. It's really, it's, yeah. And so, the lived experience is so critical. And so with that being said, I do want to bring in Gwendolyn Jones, who also has a story to share with us with regards to her lived experiences with hurricanes and floods.
Thank you. My name is Gwendolyn Jones, and my organization is called Climate Conversation, Brazoria County. I want to thank the Archbishop for inviting me, and I also want to thank the guests for attending to want to listen to what I have to say. Things are not normal anymore. I grew up in Freeport, Texas. We lived next to the Gulf of Mexico, which was walking distance, in the Brazos River. Hurricane Carla was the strongest storm that has ever hit Freeport, Galveston on the Gulf of Mexico. It was a Hurricane 5, 175 miles per hour. Beryl came in. There was no emergency plan. There was no evacuation, which they normally evacuate senior citizen or people with special needs that needs to leave the area. There was nothing. And everyone woke up to a world that we never experienced before. It reminded me of Katrina. We had no gas. There wasn't enough food because there was only 2 places open, no ice, no power, no nothing. No government assistance, no National Guard, no state or city officials. It was just us. And it was traumatizing. And even the hospitals were shut down. Texas has 54 counties. Texas is a big state. Bear affected, I want to say, between 34 and 36 counties, which were all disaster areas. We had debris everywhere. I'm in the country, big trees. I mean, everything was just all out of whack. And I saw a trailer, and the front part of the trailer was wiped completely out. Never said anything about who was in that trailer, who lived in that trailer, anything. Power lines was on the ground. It wasn't the rain that we experienced in Harvey, it was the wind. And I was told the wind was clocked at 100 miles per hour. And the reason why I'm saying this here is because during the time of Harvey, the water wasn't as hot as it is now. Harvey was a 5. This was a 1. It was a tropical and just turned to a 1. It came between Matagorda County and next to Matagorda County, Brazoria County. When that storm came through in Harvey, during Carla, Hurricane 5, we went to Houston and stayed. This is a 1, and it affected 34 counties. What I'm saying is that we no longer live how things were last year or year before last. We are living in a new time and a new day. And it's drastic and it's life-changing. Because when you don't have no emergency care, you don't have no hospital, you have no doctors, and everybody trying to find out what can they do, or just mainly we were just trying to get something to eat. No power, no lights, no traffic lights, nothing, no gas, nothing. We was left like that for about, lights started coming on toward the end of the week. And that's the reason why it's so important, because I'll make this short, because it's kids are being moved out of their one district to another district. but they have to go and find them. The buses have to go pick them up from where they're living at to take them back to the schools. Because water was in the homes, mold. We are still in this crisis situation. And we, like the first gen, everyone says, we have to unify. We have to fight for this climate change. We have, being in Freeport, we always lived around industry. The ground we live on belongs to the supplement. We are having deaths daily, weekly. Every week there's a funeral. About 2 or 3 people dying. And we got kids born with illness. And I'm so sorry for all the people that are just going through this situation, because we've been living this here practically all our lives, and my parents, all their lives. So we have to unify, we have to come together, and we have to know that we cannot allow them to say this is normal. I would not allow them to say this is normal. I will say this is climate change, and we got to shut these plants down. And the government has to do their job. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen, for such a powerful story. And just to know, what it makes me think about is we think that the ills have been addressed, but people are still living in the harms and the impact from the harms, as Chris shared and as you have shared. And so that leads me to what I just want to talk about briefly. One of the things that Gwen mentioned was it was traumatizing. And what people don't realize is trauma is not just in the moment. Trauma is carried in the body and it goes with you. It's not anything that you see on the outside. It's what's on the inside. And so how do we look at the ways in which we can begin our healing process? The first thing is we have to move beyond, we have to understand, we have to make people understand that disasters are traumatizing and that when this happens, it's long-term trauma. People, we have to also realize that when people show up in rooms, we tend to ask people, oh, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with them? No, we don't want to ask what's wrong with them. We want to ask what happened to them. Part of this work is about getting curious. I do a lot of trainings on trauma-informed approaches. And why? Because trauma-informed approaches helps us to move to healing-centered engagement because we're getting curious about one another. We're asking questions. We're moving away from, symptomizing people to emphasizing their humanity and the experiences that they've had. Dustin put something in there that I just want to repeat. He said, there is no justice. There is just us. And that's how we begin to heal, because it doesn't just happen individually. It happens collectively. It happens within our community. Our communities are traumatized. Everything about our environment is traumatized. Look at when the grass changes, when the leaves changes. Look at the fact that you don't have green spaces. Look at all of the things that you once had access to that you no longer have access to. And so this is one part of the work that that I'm moving into and saying we have to remember that in order to move through this work, we have to do it in community. We have to do it in truth. We have to do it in seeing each other as people. This is people-centered work, people-centered healing. The government doesn't see you as people until what? It's time to vote. And this is the time, even after that we need to have a conversation. We need to look at the fact that we are carrying these things in our bodies. We're carrying these things from generation to generation. A lot of times we will say one thing is just, reduced to one person. I was reading something and they said, they talked about racism. And a lot of times we talk about racism from the trauma from Black people. But what we don't realize is racism has been trauma for a lot of people because it has blocked economic barriers. It has blocked people's access to healthcare. It has been traumatizing across the board. And we have to be able to speak to that. So how do we begin to see an opportunity in the crisis? Well, you can take a page out of the COVID, pandemic. What did we do? We came together. We knew how to be neighborly. We knew how to look out for one another. We knew how to call and check on one another. We knew how to take food to someone who was in need. That's the first part, is understanding that we can come together and do what needs to be done, that we are the ones who's going to do it. Because if we don't, who will? If we don't tell it, who will? If we don't show it, who will? If we don't build the power, who will? If we don't lift up our voices, who will? If we don't speak to our traumas, who will? And so that's how we begin to heal. We begin to reveal what's going on in our communities. We begin to reveal what's going on in our families, because you cannot heal what you don't reveal. And that's the way that we move out of trauma, not quickly, but slowly. The other part of it is just remembering how we approach people. When we approach people again, because these traumas show up in our meetings, it shows up in our jobs, it shows up in our houses, it shows up in our community, it shows up everywhere we go. Because if you just smell something, guess what? It may be a trigger. And the truth is, some of us have been through so much disaster, so many disasters, that we've normalized our trauma response. So another part of this is really getting in touch with yourself, getting in touch with you, building the community that we need, making sure that we're helping one another, making sure that we're talking to one another, making sure that we are taking just the small steps so that we can move forward. Because small steps can be making that family plan, making a community plan, going to your elected officials. That small step can just be knocking on somebody's door and saying you're all right. That small step can be us standing with Chris, and helping to build, making sure they're all right. That small step can be with Gwen. That small step can be centering their voices and not us speaking for them, but speaking to them and allowing them the space to share their stories. I know we are strapped for time. We wanted to do breakout groups, but I don't see where that kind of, makes sense. I really hope that that this kind of hit home with you, to demonstrate that there are so many things that we overlook. We overlook disability, people with disabilities. We overlook the fact that people are, people who are blind, people who cannot hear, people who are bedridden. There's so many things that we overlook in this work. So I hope today helps you to have a keen awareness and a laser focus with an intention that you will connect with someone else. You will connect with another one of these groups, because that's the only way we're going to build the collective power. That's the only way that we're going to overcome. That's the only way that we can declare and decree that we are overcomers. So I have a question to ask you today. And what I want to ask you is simply this. This is our call to action. I want to know, can you be, I don't like to say I am committed to, because you don't embody it. I want you to say, I am a commitment to making an emergency plan for myself and to talk to those in my community. If you can be a commitment to that, and why do I say I am? Because when you say I am, you're embodying that. It becomes a part of you and your intention. So if you are willing to say, I am a commitment to making an emergency plan for myself, and I am a commitment to talk to those in my community, then I would like for you to put yes in the chat. Thank you. And as they're putting yes in the chat, I want to say thank you to all of our speakers. I want to say thank you to Ben from Orvie. Ben we call him Ben of all trades, because he can do any and everything. And that's how we see him, and for his continued support with our logistics. I want to thank, the Black staff and all that they do, and I also want to thank those of you who joined us today. So if you want to learn more about Black, you can go to our website, blackappalachiancoalition.org. Someone from the organization can put in whatever the social media, links are. Also follow Orvie. Orvie has a lot of information on their website. There's reports that you can use. There's things that you can take and begin to build out. I want to thank Dr. Patty DeMarco, because Patty has been so supportive in everything, I would say that I've done and in the vision of moving Black forward. And you can support her by going to her website. And if she has any social media platforms. I also want you to, if there's a way that we can keep in touch with you, and you want us to put your information in the chat, this is the way that we can begin to build our own collective power and voices together. I would like to announce, I think Patty announced that we'll have our next Lunch and Learn series on September 29th with Dr. Jalan White Newsome. We'll be sending that out. Also, Black is going to have a conversation on August 27th around the Supreme Court decision on Chevron. People don't realize, what does that mean? For us, when you hear Chris's story and others, it is going to impact and make things worse. We need to talk about what's at stake now. And that's what the series is called. What's at stake? Not only that, we want to come into conversations about Project 2025. If just 3 of those things were to happen, we would be in bad shape. And so the thing about it is, we need to educate ourselves, empower ourselves so that we can move together. I believe those are all of our announcements. But again, I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank you for being who you are, for standing up in your community, because I know that this is both hard work, but you can put your hand over your heart and say, this is also heart work, because we are meeting heart in heart. And you know what? Hand in hand, and you can extend your hand out and people will know you are not alone in this work. Look over at all of these squares and know that you are not alone. I want to thank you again for attending this Lunch and Learn. And look out, we'll send an email out with all of the PowerPoints and additional information. And just have a wonderful day, a day as wonderful as you. Matter of fact, imagine the day that you want to have and then live it and lean into it. Thank you for coming.